investigating homicides, there's no point playing the bad cop. If you want people to give you information, you've got to treat them with respect. That was the key to solving one of my most memorable cases, the disappearance of Dominic Marafiote and the murder of his parents. This was a case involving drugs, firearms, fear, and multiple murders. This is a case that would have gone unsolved, except for something that I learnt as a young detective. It costs nothing to listen. The body of a man on the front seat which was badly burnt. We don't know whether he's been shot, we don't know whether he's been stabbed. It's a horrific act, and any death is tragic. A total of 9 shots were fired.
The best detectives Victoria's ever seen.
I don't intend to stop until someone's brought to justice. Failure is not an option. It was 1985. I was a sergeant at the drug squad, Victoria Police. A man by the name of Dominic Marafiote had gone missing. Dominic was a country greengrocer. He had a shop in Mildura, rural Victoria. Married. I think they had 1 or 2 children. Known to everyone, he ran a successful business. According to the original investigators, on the day that he disappeared, it was sometime around, I think, 7 o'clock at night. He left in his truck. He told his wife he was going out to Merbeen, which was a town nearby. He didn't return home, and the following day, she reported him missing.
On Thursday, the vegetable merchant's abandoned truck was found by Victorian police about 20 kilometres outside the Riverland town. How the truck came to be on the roadside is still a mystery.
Astonishingly, that day that they locate the truck, both Carmilla and Rosa Marafiote, which is Dominic's parents, are both found shot dead in a house in Adelaide. Carmelo had been shot through the back of the head. Rosa had been shot through the back of the head. And then you get this theory about the mafia will shoot you in the back of the head. So the question is this an execution? Now, where was Dominic?
The diving team conducted a thorough grid search of the lake today without finding a trace of the missing man. Police believe his body may have been dumped in one of the lakes, although they haven't ruled out the possibility that he's still alive.
The fact that his truck was found on the side of the road, there was no disturbance, no blood at the truck. I think the original thought of investigators was that, for some reason, Dominic was responsible for the murder of his parents. His parents were known to be reasonably wealthy people. Some say they were involved in drug trafficking. And I think the speculation was that somehow he got money from them and then orchestrated his own disappearance. And that's where it was left.
The investigation floundered because Dominic couldn't be located and it wasn't clear as to what would be the motive for the murder of the parents.
It was a mystery for at least 2 years until a very good detective got to unravel it. So fast forward 2 years and we have Ron Iddles on the case looking at this, what is a cooling case, not quite freezing, but it's pretty cold after 2 years. And Ron is lucky enough to come across an informer called Billy Lees.
So it's 1987 when I first met Billy Lees. He had come forward and agreed to be a witness against some police officers in relation to corruption. He told investigators that he could also provide information about the disappearance of Dominic Marafiote, and in addition to that, the murder of Dominic's parents in Adelaide. Billy Lees had made a very short statement, and my part was to team up with one other detective, which was Brendan Murphy, and was to make an assessment to see whether what Billy Lees was saying was true, and then to see if it was worthy of further investigation. Billy Lees is what I would call a low-level criminal, and I just have a vivid recollection that he smoked like rollies.
Ron was the engine driver. I sat pretty close to the engine. But the things I learned from Ron were how to communicate with people, how to look at what you're seeking from them and how you deal with them. And Ron put a lot of thought into that.
People talk about people with a criminal history and say, do you know what? They got no credibility. I don't say that. What I say is, it costs nothing to listen. People hold secrets. People have knowledge. And depending on the circumstances as to whether they ultimately come forward and tell you. But it's about trust in the police officers. Billy Lees was someone who worked with a man by the name of Sandy McRae. McRae was well known to police in the early 80s. A man who had a reputation, whether warranted or not at the time, that he might have killed 4 or 5 different people.
Sandy McRae was a schemer, someone who portrayed himself as being very smart, a little bit better than most people.
Within the policing environment, he was somebody who young police especially often feared because he was purported to be a standover man, but someone who was reasonably tough. So he had a very checkered past. So Billy Lees knows the potential that Sandy McRae has. He would think to himself, if this ever gets back to Sandy McRae, I'm a dead man walking. Billy Lees said, well, I was told by Sandy McRae that he'd gone to Adelaide and shot both Carmelo and Rosa Marafiote. So then he details some information that only the killer would know, or the killer has told someone. So when they've done the crime scene examination, they found a small hole in the pillow with a piece of black grease. No one could ever work out what that came from. But here's Billy Lees relaying the story of Sandy, saying, I pulled the trigger the first time the hammer came down and caught between the pillow slip. The crucial bit of that story is I got something that's never ever been released to the media, which we know can only come from the killer.
So Ron Iddles goes and gets out the exhibits and he finds the pillow slip. And indeed, it's got a grease mark and that grease mark tallied with the pistol jamming on the pillow, and that's when Ron knew that Billy Lee's story was probably 100% 24 carat correct.
I guess police and investigators work on gut instinct. I knew one thing, that what I was being told was 100% accurate because it matched the crime scene. So is the killer Billy Lees or is it Sandy McRae? Then you ask yourself, would Billy Lees really come forward and put himself in to put the spotlight on him for a murder? And you sit back and you think, no, probably not. Is this more in line with what Sandy McRae would do, knowing his history and the allegations that he'd killed before? Probably is. We all have a set of morals. Low-level crooks will accept stealing a TV, will accept maybe a slight assault, but they don't accept a triple murder. Billy Lee's had a criminal history. Yes, I've taken drugs. Yes, I've stolen. Yes, I've assaulted people. But what I'm telling you today is the truth. I think deep down, he just couldn't keep that secret any longer. Billy Lees then went on and he said Sandy McRae confessed to him that he'd lured Dominic Marafiote out to his property in Merbeen. He'd shot him and buried him somewhere on the property. Now, I know that Dominic's truck was parked within 30 to 40 metres of Sandy McRae's driveway. Police at the time had spoken to Sandy and they spoke to his partner, Judy Yip, and they said, well, we haven't seen him, he didn't come here. But both Brendan and I were satisfied that what Billy Lees was saying was accurate.
It was important for Billy's peace of mind, I think, to know that the matter was going to be investigated thoroughly and properly, and that at some stage Sandy McRae may have been able to be charged with murders.
There's no doubt Sandy McRae was a dangerous criminal. We made a decision to execute a search warrant. "30 years ago, I stood here at the top of the driveway with 40 other police. We were going in to arrest Sandy McRae for 3 murders. It was 5:30 in the morning. We didn't know who was at the house. We didn't know what weapons he had. This had the potential to turn nasty. So it's 1985. Dominic Marafiote was reported missing by his wife, Rose. Astonishingly, the following day, Dominic's parents are both found shot dead in a house in Adelaide.
So fast forward 2 years, Ron is lucky enough to come across an informer. He was aware that a fellow called Sandy McRae had done away with Dominic Marafiote and probably had done away with his parents as well.
We were going in to arrest Sandy McRae for 3 murders. We didn't know who was at the house. We didn't know what weapons he had. This had the potential to turn nasty. You know that you're going in to arrest somebody who you believe has committed murder, who has a violent past, and somebody who has firearms. The adrenaline starts pumping. Your heart is thumping. Is he going to open the door? You're conscious of your firearm in case it turns bad. You're thinking about everything that could go wrong. My first impression was that he was a creep. Showed no emotion, had these piercing eyes that stared straight through you. He just looked evil. McRae invited us in. We explained the reason that we were there. He was reasonably polite, didn't object to us being there, told us to go ahead and search the property. Sandy McRae's partner, Judy Yip, was a very small person. I think all up she might have been 4'11", somewhat timid, nervous disposition. She was pleasant, but I had a view that Sandy was somebody who stood over her or had some power or control over her. So it was going to be a fairly long day in the field. I think the property was around 40 or 50 acres, so all that property had to be searched. Predominantly, we were looking for any evidence that we might find where there was a grave, if we were going to find Dominic's body. Because the search was going to take the majority of the day, McRae was arrested and so was Judy, and they were taken back to the Mildura Criminal Investigation Branch. The detectives from South Australia would interview Sandy McRae and Judy Yip first, because we believed that there was sufficient evidence to charge them in relation to the death of Carmelo and Rosa Marafiote. Now, they had to abide by the law in South Australia, and there was a time limit where you couldn't go past, I think it was 6 hours to interview both of them.
I was just absolutely terrified, really not knowing what's going on. And so they set about questioning me, going back and forth. I know this, I know that, I should do this. Tell me this, tell me that. I just kept saying to them, I'd like to help you, but I don't know anything. All I could hear was a little voice in my head saying, tell them nothing. It was the way they were drumming me, like those drill sergeants. And it was just like at me and at me and at me. And to the end I thought, well, oh, bugger off. I am definitely not saying anything.
The detectives from South Australia had finished interviewing Sandy, and he exercised his right, which he was entitled to, and said no comment. Judy had also exercised her right and had made no comment.
I first met Ron in 1987 when I was coordinating an investigation into the Marafiote murders. When the detectives from South Australia weren't successful, Ron came up and asked whether he could have a go. I thought, well, this will be interesting. My sergeant said he was one of the best operators that he knew.
I just thought, because I've said nothing to them, I'll be allowed to go home. Then Ron walked in. He swaggered in. And that's where it all started.
An interview is a conversation. It's not a race. It's a journey. The greatest gift that you could give somebody is listening with understanding, showing empathy. Not sympathy, but it's about being empathetic. Put yourself in her shoes. What is Judy thinking?
Ron tended to actually establish a relationship and not treat an accused as a lesser person. And he would try and navigate them rather than bully them to the truth.
And I remember saying to Judy something like this. Judy, you're a fragile person. I don't think there's a day gone by when you haven't thought about this.
And then he proceeded to talk to me, not raising his voice.
You know what, Judy? I understand. You would have been horrified. Yes, you might go to jail, but I'm here today to help you and I'll stand with you.
But it's just like talking to a person that had compassion.
I'm here to sit with you and I'd love you to share your story with me.
People see that he's genuine, and I think that style helped Judith realise that Ron was there to get that terrible burden off her chest and had the right words at the right time, and that's why he's such a great interrogator.
I felt safe. That, okay, he knows I know, and he can get me out of this. He's the one I could trust.
And all of a sudden she says, Ron, sharpen your pencil because I'm going to tell you what happened. Judy had separated from her husband, who ran a successful restaurant here in Melbourne. She actually answered an ad in a country paper called the Weekly Times, and there was an ad for a housekeeper. So she thought, well, maybe I'll move to the country.
Oh, when I first met him, oh, thorough gentleman. A father. He looked after his parents, so he told me. Oh, just the perfect country guy. He just... Oh, he had it, the gift of the gab. Oh, shit. After 2 bottles of champagne, I suppose I'm anybody's. And I thought, yeah, I'll make the move because it's country life. It's relaxing. It was just, my blurred vision. Biggest mistake in my life. After about a month, I knew it was the wrong thing. Yeah, just all wrong.
It was far from a champagne lifestyle. I would say they lived in squalor.
And then the violence started to come out when I'd say, go get the newspaper, come back, 5 minutes late. Where have you been? Oh, I went and got the newspaper. Oh, you're lying. And whammo. That's when the beating started. First couple I came back at him, but he let me know you don't hit back. People say, why didn't you leave him? Well, he used to remind me he knew where my parents lived. And I couldn't risk their life for anything. I just had to put up with it. Couldn't go left, couldn't go right. I was stuck. And he was always talking about his $1 million deals he was going to do and how he was going to make money, and he had some weird ideas. But you always agreed, because if you didn't agree, well, it was soon built into you to agree.
So Judy tells me, Sandy said, I've come up with a plan. I'm going to get money. And she says, well, what's the plan? Well, I've been talking to Dominic Marafiote. I know that his parents are very wealthy and his parents are involved in the drug trade. I'll get a very, very small sample of marijuana, which I'll go and buy. I'm going to show that to Dominic. Dominic said, I will take a truckload of that. It's very, very good. About a week later, the day that Dominic's coming out to fill the truck up with marijuana, Sandy is in the chook shed and he's actually dug a grave. Judy says that Dominic arrived in the truck. So she says, I'm in the kitchen and I'm very apprehensive, I'm nervous, anticipating what is going to happen. Sandy was expecting him to bring a briefcase full of money, and he's not carrying a briefcase. Sandy is standing behind him and he shoots him in the back of the head. And then he says, help me carry him out. And we go out to the chook shed, drop him into the grave, cover it over, and then put hay and stuff around to make it look like nothing had been disturbed.
It's how you speak to a person as to what the outcome is, and with Ron's ability to have that rapport with Judith, won her over, and then come out an hour later and said the body's in the chook shed. I sent forensic out to dig. They went down 2 feet. Then they rang me up and said, Jeff, there's nothing here. Ron's still talking to Judith. So I knocked on the door and I said, Ron, they're down 2 feet, there's nothing there. And he said, Jeff.
I am convinced Judy is telling the truth. Tell them to keep digging.
We were told that Dominic Marafiote had been murdered and that his body had been buried on the Macrae property.
Back at the Mildura police station, I had Judy Yip telling me, Ron, the body is in the chook shed. So Brenda Murphy and myself go back to the property and they're still digging.
We went up there to find the body and we hadn't found the body, and I think people were getting frustrated.
You don't want to dig too fast, because if you're digging too fast, you may actually put the shovel through the body. So slowly but surely they're digging it, they're sifting the dirt, because you might find a button or something. Finally, after a day of digging, they come across the body. I felt justified that I'd spent the time with Judy and validated what she'd actually told me. I've never seen a body like this. 2 years on, the body was nearly pristine. because there was a water table and a channel nearby, and what it did is actually mummified the body. So it was yellow, but it was totally intact. We were able to clearly identify he'd been shot in the back of the head. Then it's about, is it Dominic? Whilst I can look and think that it might be him, and circumstantially it probably is, the first point of proof in a homicide, when you actually go to trial, you have to prove that the deceased is Dominic Marafiote. He had a gold ring on his finger, and the ring was, "To Dominic with love from Rose," and that was his wife. So then you look at dental records, but you've actually got to find the dentist that he went to. There is no central repository which keeps all dental records. But someone said, you know what, he's had a back operation. So we went to the Mildura Hospital and we got an X-ray of his back, and he had a bent spine. We were able to take that X-ray back to Melbourne, give it to the pathologist. The X-ray that they had from the body and the X-ray that they had from the hospital is identical. Now, Judy had told me Sandy wanted to bury Dominic with his crucifix around him. And she says, I'm somewhat religious, and I think, we can't bury him with that. And I took it off him before we buried him, and I put it in a jacket in the wardrobe.
I recall going back into the house and going through her clothing items in their bedroom, and I found a crucifix. Yes. So we were well and truly then on the right path.
One thing that was significant out at the property was that I could see a dark brown Holden. That was the car which Billy Lee said that Sandy had told him they'd driven to Adelaide.
Well, it turns out that the money that Sandy McRae had wanted from Dominic did exist, but Sandy was able to establish that the cash is over at Mum and Dad's in Adelaide.
Judy says, Sandy tells me to drive his Holden out onto the highway. We drive to around 3 o'clock in the morning, and we eventually arrive at Carmelo and Rosa Marafiote's house in Adelaide. Judy says, we knock on the door and they're expecting Dominic to come with a truckload of drugs. Sandy says, well, Dominic's on his way. What I want is the money. Carmelo says, no money until I see the drugs. So Sandy says, well, jump in the car, mate. We'll go for a drive because he won't be very far away. Judy then says, we're only a short distance from the house, and all of a sudden Sandy says, oh, I can see Dominic's truck in the mirror. She said Carmelo turned around. He looked out the back window of the car, and I saw Sandy move around with the handgun at the back of his head and pull the trigger. So she said, we get back to the house. We have Carmelo dead in the back seat. So then what happens is we both go inside. Sandy had a conversation with Rosa. I want the money. She said, but I don't have any money. I don't know what you're talking about. He then got a pillow and he threatened her again. And she said, well, I don't have any money. He then used the pillow to muffle the sound. First shot didn't go off, which is corroboration of what Billy Lee says. Then the next one shot her in the back of the head. Judy says, we had a quick search, we couldn't find any money. He then made me go back out to the car, and the two of us had to basically drag Carmelo into the house. We left with no money, and we drove back, and we arrived back in Merbeen at around 7 o'clock in the morning. Now, what they actually missed is Rosa Marafiote had $30,000 in the hem of her nightie. Now, I think that was the money for the so-called drugs that were coming over. So when the post-mortem was done and they undo the hem of the nightie, there's $30,000.
Goes to show that the Marafiotes were fairly interesting people who dealt in large amounts of cash, which they hid with very elaborate ruses, which probably suggests that they were at least big players in the black economy, which would suggest drugs.
So ultimately, when we finish with Judy, and I say to Judy, well, you will be charged. You're actually going to be charged with accessory to murder.
I was remanded in custody at Mildura Hilton. That's what they call the cells. And at the back of my mind, I believed I was going to be jailed for life.
So then it becomes a situation of compiling your brief of evidence. How am I going to prove the charge against McRae? So I have the identity of Dominic, but to make sure there's the ring on the finger, which is to Dominic with love from Rose. So I track her down and she's living in Avignon in France.
So Ron had to go to France. We had just had our second child after 12 years, Matthew. I did feel let down, but that's what you would expect an investigator to do, to not worry about anything else except the case that they were on. That's what the family should get and the victims should get.
Colleen said yes, you could go. I think deep down she was hoping that I didn't go. But I went and saw Rosie's wife. I meet her at a court and she says, that is the ring that I gave my husband, Dominic, and I take a statement to that effect. So McRae had been charged. He'd been committed to stand trial at the Mildura Supreme Court. 6 months later, I remember it being a Saturday night. It was probably around 7 o'clock when I got a phone call. I was shocked. Sandy McRae has escaped from Pentridge. Think, how can that happen? Apparently he's got a rope and some blankets and gone up over the wall. Where is he going? What is he doing? He was vindictive. He might have been thinking, you know what? I will go and find Brendan Murphy. I will go and find Ron Iddles and I will dispose of them so that there is no evidence against me. I was worried about my wife, Colleen, and the children. There's only two people I've probably been scared of in my whole career, and he was one. I considered him to be a psychopath. I was worried about my family when I found out that Sandy McRae had escaped from Pentridge. He'd been charged with a triple murder.
On Saturday night, McRae, held in Pentridge's D division, used a rope to scale a prison wall before hailing a taxi.
I believed that he was an evil person, somebody who I considered to be vindictive.
The fact that a murderer had escaped did make us nervous. We had just had our second child, but I think Ron didn't tell me a lot in those days. He kept everything held back. But looking back now, you sort of think, wow, it is pretty scary.
I was concerned probably more for their safety than mine. And that's why it was established that we would have regular marked patrols past the house.
In fact, Sandy McRae was picked up a few kilometres away at Mooney Ponds, where he'd gone to see his ailing father. So there you are. Even Satan loves their mum and dad.
So eventually, both McRae and Judy appeared before the Mildura Supreme Court. Now, when we prepared that court case, we knew that Judy Ip had to give evidence against McRae.
I was there when the murders took place, and the other person's statement was hearsay, which is shaky.
Billy Least made a very detailed statement, but I said to her, what I want to tell you, Judy, is this, is that if you give evidence, that will be taken into account. Because if you don't give evidence, I can tell you right now, McRae will walk.
The intricate details of the murders of Dominic, Carmelo and Rosa, how they unfolded, how they were planned, how they were executed, would not have been able to be presented at court if Judy Ip wasn't able to get in the witness box and give that evidence.
He knew he needed me, or my testimony, but I needed him to, not to clear my conscience, but yet to allow me to speak out and to tell the truth about the murders.
Judy eventually agreed to give evidence, but she was very concerned about McRae, concerned about, I guess, some of the reach that he has. You must make sure that you look after that person to ensure their safety.
I had 4 contracts on my life. Of course, they didn't work. I trusted him. I trusted Ron. Throughout the trials, committal hearings, he was always there. And nothing was going to happen to me because he was there.
Sandy McRae had no compunction about killing, and he would have just kept killing people one way or another. He was a very scary man.
Judy indicated that it's possible that Sandy McRae may have killed up to 8 people. And she said, there's another man I believe is buried not far from the garage. And his name is O'Hara.
A tip-off to police led to the discovery of the body at Merbeen near Mildura. 59-year-old Albert Edwin O'Hara disappeared in 1984. Homicide detectives believe he was shot to death the night he went missing.
Sandy McRae was convicted of the 4 murders and was given a life sentence. He'll spend the rest of his life behind bars.
It's widely believed, and I think with some reason, that Sandy McRae was mixed up in many homicides, many premature deaths.
He was someone who was cold, he was calculating, and at times I think he actually got pleasure out of inflicting pain. He was evil, and I don't think I've come across anyone else like him in my whole career.
He used to say, "No one's ever getting this little black duck in jail." Well, the little black duck's in jail. If ever a person was possessed by the devil, he is. Not was, he is.
Judy received a sentence of around 4 years with a minimum of 10 months. I don't think that she's ever got over the fact that she was an accessory to murder, that it all started from one single ad in the paper. I still see her, I still speak to her. Most Christmases, she sends me a Christmas card, but I don't think she'll ever get over it. You know what, it's about 32 years ago when I first met you.
Yeah, longer than a marriage.
Oh no, I've been going 43
Oh,
years.
shut up.
I have.
God, you're getting boring. I felt that my nightmare was over, and I thanked him in my own head for getting me away from my partner and from the situation I was in, because I had no other way of getting out. The only thing I'm pleased with is I stopped him from murdering people.
Yeah, well, that's good. He was a psychopath.
Oh, fuck yeah.
I wondered what would have happened to Judith if Ron hadn't have got that out of her, and I think he showed her that the truth needed to be told for her sake as well as anybody else's.
Ron Iddles stands out in that he is fiercely devoted to the idea that everybody deserves a fair shake, even the crooks.
Saviour's a funny word to use, but if you could bottle his blood, you'd bottle his blood. He's just a bloody good cop.
In homicide investigations, you can't have tunnel vision. All the leads were pointing us in one direction, but something wasn't right. The information could only come from the killer, so we think we've now got a really good lead. So I make the assessment there's sufficient evidence to charge him. I have to take responsibility for that. I have to make an admission publicly. It's something that weighed on my conscience. My heart is pumping. I couldn't go any further.
New Ron Iddles, The Good Cop, next Sunday on 7 and 7 Plus.